Thank you everyone for just being such a wonderful host to the jurors and the organizers, the museum, and everyone in Taiwan who's just been really friendly and helpful. I'm very, very humbled to be part of such a wonderful exhibition, and it's just been a good time so far for this Florida boy who's never been out of the country. Long way to come, but anyway. My work is based on the Anthropocene era, which is our, do I just press the arrow? Oh. My work is based on the Anthropocene era, which is basically humans messing up the world. For the first time in history, as you can see, human activity has made a significant impact on our planet. And a lot of my work deals with pollution, overpopulation, environmental degradation, things that we just can't control so easily that humans are doing to the planet. And I work completely in slip cast molds, and I use those to create motifs. I started with making these sculptures that were freestanding based on the floral bouquet, and loosely based on the floral bouquet. I love the colors, and that's one of the pluses that I really loved about ceramics when I was introduced to it at a young age, was that you could get beautiful colors. I never liked doing anything that had already been done before in art, and the reason being is because people can always then judge you by something that they've seen before. So I never like absolutes because they create a narrow path to certainty to an extent. I'm not interested, I want to make a piece that flows poetically, visually, and the clay creates a lot of physical constraints in that respect. So I really have to take my time when I'm building the piece so that it will not collapse, and so that it is successful and it stands. This was called the Evolutionary Bouquet, and it's really the sculpture that came closest to anything looking like a floral bouquet. And like the floral bouquet, I take the molds and I pour them, and a lot of times I take a couple weeks to make the objects, and I set those aside while I'm building the infrastructure, which is usually larger pieces that will support the weight of the smaller pieces. After the Evolutionary Bouquet, everything kind of became de-evolutionary, where I would start cutting up the pieces more and more, and the pieces would become less recognizable. You can see in here there are birds in there, napkin ring holders, I think there's a lobster right there, hands, a whole bunch of things from tchotchke molds. I used to make a lot of my own molds. I have a very good background with mold making, but there's just so many molds in secondhand stores where I live that it's very easy to get these really cool old vintage molds. So that's what I do. Again, it mainly deals with overpopulation, environmental degradation, things we can't control easily. I use my positive influences are things that I see every day in life that I enjoy. I'm a big fan of architecture, so I take a very architectural approach when I'm making them. I love nature, and I strongly believe in people and the human condition and the fact that we really innately do good, and we're good to each other. My negative influences that I try to put into the work are things like urban sprawl, pollution, cars, consumerism, wastefulness, corruption, stuff like that. But again, that kind of is a little on the back burner when I try to make the piece beautiful and pretty. This shows where I started cutting up the pieces and started pretty much forming my own vocabulary with the pieces. And they were called the Evolutionary Bouquets because I stuck with the theme of the bouquet. I'm a big-time news hound, and I read the news all the time. I don't have a television, and I prefer to listen to things on the radio or things where there's no commercials. I just find that it's a lot easier to use my imagination more than having the images right there in my face. So I try to approach the artwork like that too, where it's fresh and how do I say it? I have really bad tinnitus in my left ear, and so in order to avoid hearing that ringing all the time, I listen to music and all that, and so I'm very influenced by music, and I try to make each piece like a composition of music, if that makes sense. I read a lot. I own an antiquarian bookstore, and I sell vinyl records, if you guys remember what that is. And I always joke with my wife that I've chosen the 3 heaviest things in my life to do, which is carrying clay and carrying books and records. They get very heavy. It's always an evolving process. Again, like music, I can listen to a song 1,000,000 times, and I still don't know half of the words when I listen to it again. It's part of the way I think about it, and the part of the way that I approach the work. It's kind of in my chemistry. I don't want to know the exact composition when I set out to make one of these things, but I know that I kind of want to get to a thing that is balanced and represents, you know, something beautiful, and in this case something floral, but something that has the ideas behind it that are somewhat disturbing. The black, which I'll get into in a little bit, really does a good job with counterbalancing the colors. And the black also makes the whole piece covered so that there's no bare clay body at all. I love dissonance in music, and I like putting that same concept in the work. So where you see maybe a butterfly up on the edge of the sculpture, you'll see maybe something like a wasp or something, or something, you know, that's not so beautiful down at the bottom, and it kind of lends to that whole concept of balance or off balance and the dissonance. When I cut up a lot of the stuff now, I'm really creating new objects and new forms, and I might take 2 animals that, you know, one might be a horse like the one up at the top, and I'll take it, you know, some of the other animals that are in there, the birds and all that, and I might put them together, and it kind of is creating a new mythology. And so I stick those in there, and they kind of like become characters within the piece. And sometimes I play with narrative in the work with that. And again, always inventing new shapes if I can, and trying to make something that works. I do a lot of, you know, I love architecture, again. I love the urban landscape. And so I try to mock that in the artwork as I'm doing it. And you can see, like in this black and white piece, which I don't do a lot of black and white pieces. That's kind of a good example that kind of shows you where that's coming from. The molds serve as tools in the work, and I don't use that many tools when I build these. I really only use plastic bags, a brush, and a fettling knife when I can find it. That's kind of a joke because I can't find a fettling knife here, but I do use other knives and needle tools and all that to cut the work. And it's a a very complex process because I don't know when it's going to collapse, and I've never lost one yet. So it's causing constant anxiety for me to build these things and have them even stand. And you'll see they've gotten much more complicated over the years. I don't score any of the objects. I just slip them together, and air and time are my enemy, so I have to really move slowly and with precision when I'm building them. So a lot of times I work on it a little here and there, and then I'll have to bag it because it gets a little too wet and too malleable, and you know that slip can just collapse real easily. So you got to really work with it and respect what it can do and what it can't do. And a lot of times, like I'm exhausted being here today because I've had to go back and forth to the studio just today to take care of some of the works that I'm working on now. And I've never worked in porcelain with these, so I'm using some porcelain clay body that we have here, and it's difficult, but I'm going to get it to work. It's just part of the challenge. Again, bright colors are what I do. I usually take light colored, the light colors first, and I'll throw those down into something that I kind of envision seeing the piece look like in the end. And I like melting those together with the darker colors, and you can see the yellows and the reds mix really well together, and the blues tend to make it a nice electric-like piece. And they might resemble everything from candy to maybe, for me, maybe like electricity and stuff like that. They're all stacked. They started out more stacked before. In the old days when I was using more whole pieces and all that, but now they're stacked in a different way where I'm casting a lot of the, I guess you'd call them slabs in large molds, and I allow the slabs to dry, and then I take the slabs and I cut them up so that they kind of make these bars, ceramic bars, and then I can assemble the pieces. And I still use some of the molds that are in there, but they're not really to be taken literally, because you might see a bird, but it's not really so much a bird anymore as it was in the first couple that I showed you, because I end up now, my technique's constantly changing of how I build these, and so you might not even be able to tell what it is. I can tell what it is because I've used them for so long. I've been using pretty much the same shapes for the last 12 to 15 years. So I know that when I need a piece to fit in a particular place, I'll have like the bird, or I'll have the piece of corn or something like that, and they fit together as I need them. It's really making one of these pieces is a battle, and it's me versus the medium. And it's me pushing it to the physical limits. I guess you could kind of call it action sculpting, kind of like maybe someone would do an action painting or something like that. I mean, maybe it's as close to that as I can think, because it's a very slow process. It's not like you can throw it all together and it's done, because if you did that, it wouldn't really stand. So in that respect, that's how it's kind of action sculpting. Once I start the piece, I really can't stop because it requires so much babysitting. I mean, I have to be in there brushing a little here, there, small cracks if they start forming because of like the air condition being on too much or something like that. I just got to be there to constantly take care of it and make sure that nothing goes wrong, because, like I said, I haven't lost one yet, but I don't want to, because that's, it's terrible when you lose something. Let's change the slide. A lot of times I put, the birds at the top because it looks kind of interesting, but it's also along with the evolution kind of sort of concept. What's evolving, more than other things, and I guess in my work that's kind of, does that. It's not that they're really in any kind of necessary importance, but they're there again for either decorative or because they just help balance the piece. I began using clay when I was 12 years old, and I had this great teacher, and he probably saved my life because the school was a transition from where I was coming from. I went to private school all the way up until age 12, and the school that I went to was just, it was like a foreign place for me, a different world. And so I was very alone and didn't really know what to do. I didn't have any friends there. And if you guys have ever had that same situation or similar, being in a place that you're not familiar with, it can be intimidating at times. And so I had this wonderful teacher, and he taught me ceramics. I took all the stuff that I could take in ceramics. I would get there in the morning at 7 o'clock in the morning before school started just to meet him. And we talked a lot, and we talked about ceramics. And he was a goofball. I mean, he was like a kid, but I think that was probably part of the fun that he brought into it and all that. And so I guess when I was initially introduced to ceramics, it was as a fun sort of thing. And I enjoyed just what you could do with it. The first time I fired a cup, which is what I think I was first starting out doing, it was just amazing to know that you could, make this object and drink out of it. Now over here, I'm sure it's much different, that everyone knows, that it's, part of the culture. But where I'm from, it's like, you drink out of cups that are, machine made, and they make so many of them. They usually have a decal with a logo on them that says something like Bank of America or something. So it's, you take it for granted, I guess, until you have the opportunity and situation to make it. So anyway, this professor, getting back to him, my 7th to 12th grade, or 7th to 9th grade teacher, had a really close friend in Jacksonville, Florida. And I don't know if you know anything about the States, but Jacksonville, Florida has a lot of, I don't know, it's a big place, it's a big city, but it is kind of behind in the times. So there's not really a lot of culture. I mean, it could be really culturally challenging at times, especially inland Jacksonville. I grew up on the beach. That is one of my major influences in the world, but getting back to the Jacksonville thing, my teacher that I first met had this really good friend that collected Vulcas and had Arneson stuff and had it in her house. And I heard these stories about these people, for many years about, who these people were and what they did. And it was exciting to me. It really captured my imagination to see what could be done in clay, because when you're looking at these people, Richard Notkin, was another one. It was amazing what you could do with it. It was something unlike anything else, any other medium that you could use. I mean, with clay, it's an additive and a subtractive process. With bronze, you can't do too much more. And glass, it's very tight, but at least, I really took to doing ceramics, and I became a really good wheel thrower, and that's what I wanted to go to school for. But I went to college for ceramics, and where I went was a very good school, and it was almost like going to church. It was taken so seriously, and it was so apart from like the fun. I mean, not that it wasn't fun, but it just became so much more serious because now I'm like working with artists that really know their stuff, and I'm actually meeting the people that I always looked up to when I had seen their work on the posters and all that. So it was kind of like a whole mythology in itself, where you meet these people, and it was wonderful. It was wonderful to be able to meet them and work with them, and it was very influential. And then I transitioning to real life really was after grad school. And I think one of the scariest things that you can do as an artist is to be in that situation where you're in between, graduation and figuring out what the heck you're going to do when you do. Because there's a lot of artists out there, and there's a lot of artists graduating. How are you going to stand out when you do it? What are you going to do? And I really didn't want to fall into the trap of making the same things that, I've been doing, in school and all that. And at this point I was full on in doing sculpture, but I was doing figurative work. And I was doing mold work. I made these gigantic molds. They were 1,000 pounds each. And I was mass producing heads. And that was pretty much what paid for my education. And so I learned a good lesson there in being able to market work and make big work, and started doing mold making, which I loved. And I would try to really cast complicated objects. And as you can see from the work, I really want to make the most complicated objects that I can, because to me that's my challenge, is trying to just do something that hasn't been done. I love making figurative work, but there's so many people out there that can do it so much better than me. I was a good thrower, but there's just too many people out there doing that thing. So I need to really come up with something that I felt I could do for a long time, where I could go on this personal voyage of making something that at least to me was important, and that hopefully other people enjoyed what I was doing. So I have about 150 of these small molds that I use in my, and this picture here is kind of like, I'm showing you the influences that kind of I see when I make these, like the thorn bushes. This is an early version of one of the thorn bushes that I did, and you can see the cactus kind of is what I was shooting for there. But I have about 150 plaster molds that I use, and they're really worn down, but it really adds to that whole idea of evolution and the piece being constantly evolving. They're all stacked still for the most part. I do not draw anything before I do it, because I don't want to have any preconceived notions of what it's going to look like. To me, the whole challenge is being able to have a rough idea what you want, knowing that you're going to do something vertical, and then executing that idea. It's always like a new exploration for me, and I constantly want to discover something new when I do it, and I do. I think every piece that I do, these were holders. I started taking some of the same ideas, and I wanted to make vessels, kind of. And so these hold some of the objects that I work with. Some of them I made the molds for, like the doll's feet and all that, and some of the pottery I made, but again, I want to make something that's new and interesting looking, and always be inventing and taking it one step further. So yes, the molds are ragged by now, and it's better for me because it just keeps going with the abstract thing, and it's an evolution process. It goes back to my time in stacking things. As a kid, I loved working with Legos. I think everyone loves playing Jenga. If you play that, it's balancing it, and it's trying to get something that will stand, and something that's, in this case, that means something. And so again, I'm constantly trying to invent new shapes, new systems for building, creating new tools to execute these ideas. When I work with the plaster molds, it allows me to remove myself from the actual physical making of the clay objects. I think that's kind of been important in the later stuff, because I don't know, it's just one less thing that I have to really think about, and I don't like, I've got enough on my plate when I'm doing one of these, so I like to not think about that, because there's so much more to think about. I don't know if you guys know what this is, but this is something that we saw a lot of back in 2010. And this is the the BP Oil Deepwater Horizon leak that was in the Gulf of Mexico off of the coast of Louisiana. And they showed this probably for 4 months straight, and you really couldn't escape it with the fact that it was just leaking. I mean, it was pouring out tens of thousands of barrels of oil a day, and it just you couldn't get away from it. And this was going into the Gulf, and I live on the Gulf Coast also. I live in south of Tampa, if you know where that is. But if this is Florida here, I'm here, and right up above here is New Orleans. And so right kind of in the middle of there is where the spill happened, and it was just gushing. So, real quick, this is my little graphic here that showed within 3 months, this is the path that the oil would take. And it's just right there going by me on Florida, and it's gonna go all the way around. The jet stream takes it out there, and then who knows where it goes, but it goes somewhere. And that is really disturbing to me. And if that's not disturbing to you, then, you know, it's, and this stuff happens all the time. You know, this is just something that we hear about. You hear about, you know, oil spills years later happening and how the big companies cover it up. And so I think my pieces really took a strong turn here. They've always been environmental. They've always been, you know, I try to make them beautiful somehow, but there's something that really hits my nerves when I see animals dying because of, you know, things that could have been avoided in human tragedies. You know, having a hurricane is one thing. I've lived through a hurricane. I'm sorry for anyone who has been affected by the recent one that hit. I guess you could call them typhoons. But my studio was leveled in 2004. The eye of the hurricane went right over it, right after I built it, and it was destroyed. You know, natural disasters happen. That's understandable, but these accidents that are man-made are the ones that really get me. And then there's a lot more than just man-made accidents. There's, you know, things in the environment like nuclear testing and things like that, you know, they say if we ever had one nuclear war that it would be over for the world, even if it just went between a couple countries. But if you think about all the couple thousand tests that they've done, there's probably so much crap in the air right now that, you know, we're breathing it, and, you know, cancer rates, all that, blah, blah, blah. You know, I don't need to go on about that, but this is what the BP oil spill did for me. And I did these large pieces that were probably about 5 or 6 feet tall, depending. And I took all the color out of my work in protest. And I wanted to just kind of make the work look like it was covered in oil. And so I had this process that I'd worked with the black. And I think that, you know, it affected me so much. And so I did quite a few of these. I was able to luckily show one out in Korea in 2011, and I showed the rest in Naples. I used to work in a really nice art gallery in Naples she represented me, and I was there for about 10 years, and we were doing great things, you know, doing great shows, doing really wonderful stuff for ceramics. And then she unfortunately passed away, so I kind of went into a time where that kind of shows you the scale and the components of the piece. I kind of went into a tailspin after that because we had so much planned, and so I became very much to myself. I mean, I'd still show everywhere and all, but she was a very good friend of mine, and she had helped me out tremendously, and she was definitely one of those two friends that you should have. And she believed in ceramics. I had a major exhibition over there of these works, and I like to research out my subject matter. I met a lot of people who were affected by the spill. You know, Facebook's great for that, to meet people and talk about these kind of topics and see how it affects like the local fishermen and how it's destroyed so many people's, you know, livelihoods and all that. You couldn't really eat the fish or the food there for a long time, and you really don't know if it's still safe because of all the dispersant that they were dumping into the water. And this is the piece that actually went to Korea. So I think that all this stuff adds up somehow. All the bad stuff that happens, the exhaust from cars, the greenhouse warming, and you name it, man-made accidents. They're avoidable, but that's the way that the work, the direction that it came, and I just pretty much used the same sort of techniques, but they were much, much bigger. Let's see. Again, there's still, a lot of the dissonance, the balance, the physical construction. I mean, they're really beasts to work with, and they're battles to do. But I think the success for me is when you can make a piece that you do all that, and you sweat, and you win. You win when you finish it, because I think that's my satisfaction, is the end result. It's fun to share it with everyone, but I think that really for me, the most fun is when I put that finishing touch on it. And the finishing touch doesn't come when it comes out of the kiln, because I do some stuff to it at the end of it, with coloration and stuff like that, but for the most part, they're glazed. I use India ink, though, a lot of the times to get some certain textures, and depending on what temperatures I'm firing the slip at. And for all these, I'm using low fire slip white. It's very predictable, it's very plastic, and it allows me to, I've really developed a process where I know how much to give and how much to take. So then let's fast forward just a little. I started doing these cages, and the cages, these are more like little maquettes, where I would be able to experiment with some things that I'm going to do for some of the bigger works. And I did this after about a couple years of the BP work, and started slowly introducing more color back in and going back to the nature thing. But I think that the whole experience with losing one of my best friends, as the gallery owner, the work became more, I think, self-portrait, where I started building these cages. And the cages are, I think they're still beautiful, and they hold beautiful things, but cages are like a defense, and they can protect you, but they can also keep a lot of the good stuff out. And so whether or not that's good or bad, cages can, they've been used for a lot of stuff over history. This piece was called Gibbet, and if you're familiar with what the gibbet is, it's not too pleasant. And so I thought that the birds were a nice way to kind of counterbalance the cage. Again, it's sometimes when I leave them whole, they're a little more literal in meaning than if I don't. And so it just makes it a little more less, I think, horrifying. That's a close-up of the birds. You can kind of see some of the decal work. I used to do a lot of decal work. This is a small cage that I did. This has no molds in it, but again, it's the same process where I pour out the bars, and I cut them up and create something out of it. What it is, I'm not sure, but I do have a rough idea on what I want to go to, or what I want to achieve. They kind of represent isolation for me. I've worked a lot alone since 2012, and I don't get out. This is the first time I've left my country, and so a lot of this, again, it's kind of self-portraiture, because it's the way I've been rolling. But it's kind of roughly what I'm trying to achieve here is this cage thing, and whether or not that's good or bad, it's kind of what I've been working on. And then so these cage pieces that I did, again, they have the birds and all that. I'll just go through some of these because I know that time's probably getting a little close, but again, these are like maquettes. I had some narrative stuff where the animals are kind of chasing each other and stuff like that. A little more lighthearted than the gibbet. I have these exercises that I do in preparation for when I do my larger pieces, where I try to build a piece as fast as I can. And so, for instance, I was building these in about, I don't know, about 10 minutes, 20 minutes, just to see how I could push the medium and get it to stand and that. There's more behind it as far as, you know, slight narrative goes, but for the most part, these are little maquettes. Again, I'm mostly concerned about the building of the piece. I love the whole process of making it, and you know, I almost could not, you know, really do the glaze and it would be all right, but you know, you really do need to finish it off. So I finish it off the way I think that going back to like the bouquets and all kind of represents that floral arrangement, you know, to where I'm constantly arranging the pieces to work. And I love the runs, I love the glazes, I love that you can do this and they're so bright when they come out. And then really the next big thing that influenced me that I think was horrible was Fukushima. I mean, let's face it, that is something that, like the BP oil thing, is just not stopping. It's, I don't know if I can't get my laser. Ha, okay. So you all know where this is. Well, you can see that the red target was ground zero. And this is a 5-year time lapse, and this is 5 years pretty much today since it happened. And this is where all that radiation's going. You know, it's hitting us right now over there in the United States, but they had something like a 20-year time lapse, and it didn't even dissipate. And so I think I can't avoid not commenting on things like this when I see it. And so this is really stuff that I want to incorporate into the work. I thrive on disastrous things. I know that sounds pretty morbid, but there's just something about it, you know, that amazes me, that we could let this happen. And you know, it's just amazing to see it, you know, and it's terrible. I think it's going to take a long time for this to go away. But this was my piece, Fukushima, that I did, and I tried to capture the spirit of it. I guess, you know, I hate to be kind of cliche, but you know, I guess you think of, like, you know, green when, you know, melting down and nuclear hazard, you know, and all that. You really can't, in an abstract way, make that. So this is my interpretation in taking what I do and using the melting and the dripping. And again, I've really taken the process, I think, a step further with the drips and with the construction, and so it's constantly evolving. And I use a Tang Sankai influence to do the works. I think I do that a lot in the subsequent works, where you have that traditional Chinese decoration, and I figured, you know, since it's, you know, dealing out in the East, you know, with such a tragic thing, that was fitting. And so I do that kind of with my other stuff since then. I like a limited palette, kind of toned it down a little. I know they're still crazy, but this is sort of a hybrid thorn bush and cage, and one of my more, I'd call them major pieces. I think that any piece that's you know, about the size that's in the show, Anthropocene here, is one of my major sizes. Everything else is pretty much either just like more maquette or model to experiment on how I kind of want to build them bigger and all that. But again, you can see like the thorns are reminiscent of razor wire, thorns, things that keep you out, and you know, things that can keep things in, protection, isolation, and just really trying to balance them as I go, and try to make something that's a beautiful object. And then that brings us to the final piece, which is Anthropocene. And so this is the way I want to go, and I really appreciate everyone listening to me today and allowing me to share with you something that's so important to me, and I'm very passionate about it. I sleep and eat ceramics, and I just can't get enough enough of it, and I just appreciate everyone else's appreciation too. It's been a wonderful time seeing what everyone else has, and again, I'm very humbled and honored to be here. So thank you very much, and if you have any questions.